would ask Dr. Marius Warg Næss to present Rangelands Fragmentation, Enclosure and Impacts. He's coming from Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, Norway. Dr. Marius?
Thank you.
Warg?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Can everyone see the screen?
Can you raise your microphone a little bit? Because
let's see if I can make that happen. Is it better now?
a little bit, even louder.
And how about now?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And yeah, please.
Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, we do. Everything is fine.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Marius. I'm working as a researcher at the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage. My background is as an anthropologist, and I've been working with nomads in Tibet and also reindeer herders in Norway. So today I'm going to talk about rangeland fragmentation and basically give some brief ideas about both ecological and social consequences of fragmentation. So in general, fragmentation is thought of as the dissection of natural landscapes. And there was this paper that came out a couple of years ago who kind of mapped out degrees of fragmentations in known rangelands. And what they actually show is that in Central or Inner Asia, rangelands are more or less intact compared to, for example, more modern ranching systems like in United States or in Australia. And in general, we can think of fragmentations as being caused by three different types of sources. First one is often named as dissection, basically meaning that physical or administrative boundaries restricts movement between neighboring land fragments. For example, you have fences between summer and winter pastures. And then you have decoupling, which is a loss of key areas that have worked as a bridge between different parts of the landscapes. And both in Norway and in Tibet, you have examples of that in terms of mining areas taking over important areas of rangelands. And then you have compression, basically meaning that while previous activities were stretched out over a wide area, now it's more concentrated around settlements or around waterholes. And fundamentally, they are caused by political processes, like, for example, changes in tenure systems. And in general terms, nomadic pastoralists have traditionally owned animals privately, or at least households that own animals. But rangelands has been owned or at least regulated by groups of herders. But all over the world, you have this kind of political incentive to privatize pastures. And often the motivation is quite good. I mean, for example, they want to develop pastoral societies, increasing living standards, provide social benefits like schooling and stuff like that, which is easier to do in permanent settlements. But also you have this argument concerning sustainability, where pastoralists are often viewed as trapped in social dilemmas, where individuals act independently and seek to maximize short-term gains at the detriment of collective benefits. For example, the tragedy of the commons, which is a widely used model, basically saying that pastoralism as a production system is inherently unsustainable because the incentive is to maximize livestock numbers and you overgraze pastures. So privatization is occurring within an official debate pertaining to overgrazing and degradation. And the main idea comes from economics, that if you give people exclusive use to an area, they will be more incentivized to take care of it and actually use it sustainable. And one of the things I've been working on is looking at the similarities between Norway and China. And what's kind of has struck me as a bit strange is that Norway and China has completely different political systems, but in terms of how we deal with nomadic pastoralists, the official policy is more or less the same. So, for example, in China, traditionally all land was owned by the central government in Lhasa or big monasteries that allocated the pastures to herders, often at a 3-year interval, where pastures were reallocated based on animal numbers. But this system was dismantled during the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s, where basically they took independent households, put them in communes, and said, okay, while you had an individual production system earlier, now we're going to do all this in collective communes. But this, of course, changed in the 1980s, where the communes were dissolved and the Chinese government introduced the household responsibility system, which basically, or with short words, just meant that decision-making were devolved to the households. All households got a share of the commune's livestock and had to start to herd their animals independently again. The second stage of this transformation was that rangeland was also privatized, or at least household got 50 or 100 years lease on private areas. Similar things are happening in Norway, not as dramatic as in China, but in Norway, all pastures are owned by the state, and you have a system. Let me see if I can find a laser pointer. So you have a system where you have summer pastures for reindeer herds along the coasts, and then you have common winter pastures on the interior, which is at the border of Finland and Sweden. So in Norway, we have this debate where reindeer herding is unsustainable and it's not profitable. So they want to increase production and increase the sustainability of the reindeer herding husbandry. And one of the things they want to do is to change these communal areas on the interior and give groups of herders private grazing rights to that. Because the idea is that if we can just put square kilometers on an area, then we can calculate how many reindeer can we keep and be ecological sustainable. And this thing has been going on for quite a while in Norway. You have traditionally reindeer herding was cross nation states. So herders in Norway, they had the winter migration into the Finnish side. But in 1852, that border closed, and ever since that, the area for grazing reindeer has diminished. But again, I mean, the idea of this kind of privatization of communal rangeland, the intention is good, because what they actually want to do is give power back to more traditionally group structures in the reindeer husbandry the SIDA system, which is an intention is to increase co-management by giving them more of their say in official policy and in legislation, actually. So fragmentation is only a problem if key resources are distributed unevenly in space or in time. So in contrast, if they are distributed unevenly, like for example, this is just a conceptual figure showing it, that if you have some areas that have better quality grass than other, or water holes utilized by livestock present at some places, like in Africa, or you have winter pasture and summer pastures at different locations, like in Tibet and Norway, fragmentation represents the problem because it might destroy the connectivity between important resources. So, for example, in Tibet, there has been this observation that nomads traditionally had winter pastures in valleys and summer pastures up in the mountains. And when they started to privatize pastures, they started to fence in their summer and winter pastures because they wanted to protect important resources from other herders. And in Tibet, the growing season is really short because there is a high altitude. So it starts like in late April or early May and ends somewhere in September. And winter pastures are especially sensitive because you have to save them for a time of the year where there is no vegetation growth, basically. So they save it. And this kind of fencing used to be encouraged by the officials. They actually subsidize both the erection of fences and the cost of buying fences. The problem, of course, is that when you have these kind of fenced-in patches all over the landscape, moving between them is difficult. So the real problem concerning, at least from an ecological point of view in terms of fragmentation, is how we think resources are distributed. How do we think that grazing resources on rangeland are distributed? And as we heard before today and earlier during the summer school, is that pastoralists move. That kind of indicates that resources are unevenly distributed. And this also has a kind of consequence when you think about climate change. This map is getting a bit old in terms of it's not been updated with the new IPCC report, but it's more or less the same, that all areas where pastoralists inhabit, you get most likely more occurrences of extreme weather events like snow, droughts, storms. Also, you might have more variable rainfall. So basically, climate change exacerbates production risks for pastoralists. So problems concerning fragmentation and climate-related or weather-related issues such as snowstorms have traditionally been dealt with through mobility. And mobility is often classified according to the spatial extent of movement. We heard before about transhumans, but there are other ways of thinking of it. You can think of it in terms of resource exploitation mobility. This area where I spent my fieldwork during my master's, they moved from summer to spring to autumn and to winter pastures in a rotational pattern. It wasn't very large distances, but they moved around so that they can save up grazing for the different periods of the year. In Norway, there is a different pattern where you move herds of reindeer up to 170 kilometers from the coast during summer and to the interior during winter. And the reason for that is that on the inland, you have a stable winter climate with not much snow, while on the coast you have more heavy amounts of snow during winter. So basically, it's a response to the seasonal needs of livestock. And then you have escape or micromobility, movement to escape environmental hazards. So, and this has kind of been launched as being the primary reason for the survival of most nomadic pastoralism, because it provides nomads with flexibility needed to survive in patchy and unpredictable, low productive environments. And also studies have shown that mobility helps to deal with droughts and snowstorms, that herders who actually move, they do better than herders that stay put. So it's mobility, despite what several governments think, is a rational strategy aimed at dealing with the vagaries of the herding lifestyle. And privatization has actually been implemented as a countermeasure to what they have perceived as unsustainability. But the actual outcome or consequences of privatization has been the opposite of what they actually intended to do, because you increase concentration of people and livestock, and there again you increase rangeland degradation, while at the same time you limit the nomad's ability to escape environmental induced hazards. So that's kind of the paradox, that fragmentation and privatization and reduced mobility has been found to exacerbate the same effects it was introduced to counter. And now I will go over to talk about the social consequences, which is kind of been what I've been working on the last couple of years. And the main premise for that work is that herding is a collaborative activity. These ideas started out during the fieldwork I did in Tibet, where I looked at how herders went out with their livestock every day. But it wasn't one herd per household, it was like a herd consisting of animals from several households, and where they shared labor between them. So you kind of had this rotation where one day one household contributed a herder and the next day another one. And that freed up people to do other stuff, for example, hunting. So more recently, I looked at is it a similar pattern between the east and west areas of Tibet? And in terms of social organization, there are similarities where you have this kind of nested levels, where you have the household, and then you have the herding group or Rurskor circle of tents in the east, and they consist of animals from several households. And basically they are designed, or not designed, but they consist of close family members. So this is a kinship map over one group of herders in the western parts of Tibet, and split into different herding groups. So as you can see, basically there is one old grandfather who's found this group, and they work together. They got one area from the government that, okay, here you're supposed to herd here, and then they solve problems through labor exchange by going together, and they balance when they decide to go into groups and herd together, they balance the need for a minimum number of animals and a maximum number of animals, because you can't have too many animals in one group because it will overgraze, but you can't have too few because then you lose control as a herder. And you have a similar system in Norway, where you have what's called a SIDA system. It consists of 2 to 6 households. It's often formed around siblings, and authority is informal, where you have often the most experienced leader, experienced herder, sorry, that is the leader, and they're also flexible, meaning that they can change composition from season to season. In Norway, you have, for example, sidas that are bigger during summer than during winter. And also, at least traditionally, you could change membership. So if you are dissatisfied with the group you belong to, you can exchange group. And the same thing is also the case in Tibet, where you have somewhat larger number of households, but it's also based on siblinghood, and you have informal leaders and also seasonal differences in composition. And while I'm not done yet, but I'm starting to try to document these groups all across the world, and this is a pattern we see not only in Norway and Tibet, but you see it in Mongolia, you see it in Iran, Central Asia, in Africa, Pakistan, etc. So this is kind of why I say that herding is collaborative activity, because this is a very common pattern. So what are the social consequences of privatization? From a theoretical point of view, mobility, meaning the movement of people, has been important prerequisite for cooperation. The logic is quite simple. Imagine that you work together in a group with other herders. Suddenly you discover that some of your fellow herders never contribute to a common task. For example, they rather stay in the tent than help out herding when sharing wool. But they gladly accept help with their own animals, but never help out when other herders need help. So the ability to change group allow people who actually want to cooperate to go together with other cooperators. And also it limits cooperators' exposures to defectors. It's known as the walk away hypothesis. And there are indications that simply providing the option to move allows cooperation to persist for a long period of time. And it's a bit hard to see how such a flexible system of group formation can be upheld in a system with privatized and or fenced in grazing areas. And some of the effects that have been documented in terms of privatization and fencing is that you reduce interaction between people, you reduce security, because you're working on your own. You're not actually benefiting from a kind of communal support. And it increases workload, and then especially for women and children, limits sharing of labor, food and pastures, and also, of course, increased degradation. And there are examples of, after privatization, relationships that used to be of a cooperative nature has been become conflictual. So if you look at this in terms of climate change, climate change or for pastoralism, there are two important sources of variation. One is spatial, that herders buffered by mobility, and fragmentation breaks physical connectivity. And then there is this temporal component, that some years are bad, other years are good. And traditionally, at least in reindeer husbandry and other areas, this can be buffered by herd accumulation. The logic is basically, if you have a large herd, you can suffer to lose animals, but still survive during bad times. But what we found in our studies in terms of reindeer herding is that the ability to build up herd or increase productivity is based on the ability to cooperate. So basically, herders who cooperate with more people or have better cooperative relationships have higher productivity. So to try to sum up, I will say that with the question mark that privatization and fragmentation reduce mobility and increase degradation, and it might also increase inequality, because you have examples that when, especially from China, when the redistribution of pastures to private household became, some herders were in a better position to get the best pastures for themselves. And also it negatively impacts efficient cooperation. And then in turn, it might exacerbate the negative effects of climate change, because you are destroying the cooperative nature of nomadic pastoralism. And that's my final word.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marius Warg Næss.